Hey friends, I'm Jonathan Smith, and this is Jump In with Jonathan, the podcast that makes you think, smile, and take action. Are you ready to jump in this show with me? Let's go. Welcome to Jump In with Jonathan podcast. I am your host, Jonathan Smith. Thank you so very much for listening to the podcast today. I hope that you learned something from the podcast. I want to say thank you to all of those that shared, like, subscribe, and follow us on all platforms of social media. We do not take that for granted because we could not do this podcast without you guys here today. Today, I have a very special host, a very special guest on my podcast by the name of Eric Skorskinsky. And if I butchered his name, I'm sorry. He is the host of Preacher Boys podcast. Thank you, Eric, for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, really excited to be here and to jump in.
Yes, sir. Thank you so very much. So, Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Eric Skorzynski, and I grew up within the independent fundamental Baptist movement in Southern California. For people listening who I'm sure are familiar with that world, like our school and church was kind of a Frankenstein's monster of different IFB influences. I had a pastor who grew up under the influence of Jack Hyles and kind of the Hammond circles. I had a youth pastor that was from Pensacola, and then a bunch of staff that were from just assorted conservative Baptist colleges around the country, and then a good swath from West Coast Baptist College. So I got to see the preferences and influences of all of those individual groups. And so I think in a good way, in a good way, that helped us not be too much like any specific place. But in a negative way, we also pulled some of the negative quirks from all of those different environments. So it was a really interesting upbringing. It's interesting now doing the show where I talk about that movement a lot. How many of my guests I relate to, even if they were in Indiana or if they were in Florida or wherever they were around the country. But I grew up a staff kid for the first 18 years of my life. My parents were teachers at the Christian school. My dad was an assistant pastor. And then my mom was a literature teacher, taught Sunday school classes. Like they were heavily, heavily involved. So I was quite literally born and raised in the independent fundamental Baptist movement. Around the time I was in 10th grade going to 11th grade, there was a man who came to our church kind of suddenly. I Googled his name. Long story short, found out that he had left his prior ministry due to sexual abuse of a teenager. And he arrived at our church. I found out, started like raising my voice about it, and very quickly found out that people either didn't care or they were upset that I was talking about it, which led to a pretty difficult last 2 years that led to me ultimately leaving that church once I graduated and then trying to figure life out outside of it the next couple of years, which was a rocky road. But that's kind of like the immediate template that kind of explains my upbringing, my familiarity with that world, and why I ultimately had that bubble kind of burst. Going from like, we're the church on a hill, we're set apart, nothing bad happens here, everyone else does what's wrong and we don't. And then realizing like, oh, this can happen here, which was pretty startling.
Yes. So, how did you start your podcast, Preacher Boys?
Yeah, so after I graduated, I went to a church that was no longer IFB, but was technically IFB. It was, we could go to movie theaters or listen to music that had a drum in it, without being terrified of what was going to happen. And, it was a very, they were trying to figure out like, what does it mean to not be legalistic? And, it had its looking back, there's warts everywhere, but I think it was a really good step out of the world that I was in. It
Hmm.
allowed me to research on my own and research without giving me guidelines of like, here's who you can read and can't read. I was able to just kind of freely start kind of diving in. And, over the next couple of years, I just really developed my own understanding of what I felt faith was and what I felt
Hmm.
my religious beliefs were, and eventually ended up pursuing ministry and working with a missions organization for about 2 years, and ended up, splitting off from that group and found myself kind of going like, what do I do now? And like a lot of
Hmm.
people who leave ministry, it's like, okay, I'm going to get a secular job. I'm going to just kind of figure things out. And I was driving home from that job one day and I pulled up a story that was near identical to the story that I had stumbled across as a teenager and just thought to myself, okay, I already knew that wasn't a one-off story, but this is still happening over and over again. And it's
Hmm.
happening in the same way, and the churches are responding the same way. In this particular case, there were pastors on Twitter that were retweeting the story after the man had pled guilty and trying to raise money for his legal fees. And I just sat there going, well, this just isn't okay. And so I went out, I recorded a live video that was like 7 minutes long. I said, if you're going to a church where they support these people, and I named the people that supported him or this organization, like you need to ask some serious questions to your
Hmm.
pastor. And long story short, that kind of launched the podcast. Like I started talking about it and was like, someone needs to talk about this in an ongoing way, and nobody was. And so why not me? I guess I'll start doing it. That was 2019 when I did the video, and then 2020 was kind of when the show officially started. So it's been 5 years almost, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, cool deal. I seen on YouTube you have over 24, or you have right at 24,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah.
I know the other day you reached a 500,000 views. So in that process, how many predators have you covered, or do you have a number, a rough number?
I don't have a running total. I mean, hundreds at this point. I've done, I think, well over 300 episodes. I'm probably closer to 400 episodes now. I mean, it's got to be in the hundreds. And I've talked to probably hundreds of survivors, both on the show and then behind the scenes.
Right. So in this process, how many of the hundreds of predators have you covered are IFB in a percentile? Is it 95, 100%, or 75%? What would you say?
I would say most. I was laser focused on the IFB for the first like 4 years, and so I would say the majority were. Now that I've kind
Hmm.
of expanded into like I've talked about the SBC because a lot of there's a lot of crossover and things, but in the beginning it was all IFB, and then now I would say it's still a strong percentage of both the IFB proper, where like they would affiliate with all the like the main conferences and colleges and things, and then a lot that are just like local, literally independent Anabaptist churches, which
Right.
they're not affiliated to a denomination, but um, yeah, a good chunk are of the IFB stripe.
Yeah. One of the things that bothered me about the IFB, and I was a member of the IFB for many years. I still have lots of friends that are still in the IFB, and they criticize me for stepping out. And I know you've caught a lot of heat for stepping
Hmm.
out. But one of the things that surprises me about it, and I don't mean to talk political, but this is an open show, so we can, is that the IFB is like Trump supporters.
Hmm.
There's no wrong. There's no
Yeah.
wrong in Trump. There's no wrong in the IFB. When you bring up an issue of Trump, they shut it down, they gaslight, they do all of these things very narcissistic about it. And the same way in the IFB, when you say, hey, the IFB has problems, they want to shut it down, they want to conceal it, they want to hide it. Recently, I was exposing some stuff in the IFB, and this is what I was told. Said, you need to keep that quiet. You need to push that down because you're going to send the world to hell. The
Hmm.
world needs to know we as Christians are to be a light. Light is transparent. Light doesn't cover. Light doesn't hide. Light exposes. So, in order to be a light, we have to be willing to expose when we have people who screw up the process.
Yeah.
And I am very disgusted, and I've listened to many of your shows. I'm very disgusted at how people can say, "Let's just kick this can down the road and cover it up."
Right.
Um, I was watching the other day an episode, I think it was of yours or somebody's, that's Jack Trieber come out and said that he was going bankrupt or close to going bankrupt because of trying to cover all these legal expenses.
Yeah.
Um, what makes these guys think it's okay to keep covering this up?
I mean, I think it's protecting the ministry first and foremost. And I think this goes back all the way to, I mean, this goes back all the way to the Jack Hyles days and before that. I mean, and I caught some flack from people when Let Us Pray came out because there was a lot of um, people that were like, well, Jack Hyles is kind of positioned as the founder of the IFB, and he wasn't really, and you can go to J. Frank Norris, and yes, all that stuff is true, and that's all stuff we talked about in our full interviews. At least I did the full interviews with the documentary. Um, but when I look at it, it's like Jack Hyles was kind of the Walt Disney. He wasn't the guy that
Mm-hmm.
invented theme parks, but he's the guy that invented theme parks. Jack Hyles
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the founder of fundamentalism, but he took that brand and made it the brand that we kind of see today. And so I think you saw from the very beginning, if you look at those early press conferences that he would hold, where he would kind of take the media to task for critiquing their ministries. And he would say, look at all the good we do. Look at the buses we run into the inner cities of Chicago. Look at the work that these men are doing. And it's all getting torn down because of some baseless accusation. And that was like his go-to line. And so I think what you've seen over the last couple decades is people going, the ministry is doing so much good. And if we
Mm-hmm.
talk about these issues, it's going to destroy everything. Whether that's us helping the needy in the community, whether that's ultimately, as they would say, like, leading people to the Lord and walking down the aisle, like it is going to do damage. And so it's really an inverse of a common, gospel parable, which is like, we're going to discard the one sheep to protect the 99 instead of
Mm-hmm.
going out and whatever happens, happens, we're going to protect that one that's vulnerable. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's really what I think has happened is like the organizations have become so big and so powerful and so important that like we don't have time for the minutia of a victim or of helping an individual who's been harmed.
Mm-hmm. And that's sad because we have so many victims, but the problem is the pastors are playing victims.
Right.
Um, I listened to your podcast. I don't know how long ago it was, but you made a statement and you brought out where numerous people blame Bathsheba for
Hmm.
David's sin. And I actually, a few months ago, was teaching through the life of David, got to that part. 95% of the writers, John Phillips, Piper, MacArthur, David Jeremiah, all of those guys, and go study them out for yourselves, place the blame on the woman.
Yeah.
There were many, there were many sermons. I read numerous sermons on there's sermon notebook, there's another sermon thing, just trying to gather information and on the life of David. So I was on a better understanding. And 95% of those blamed the woman.
Yeah.
And I said, it wasn't Bathsheba's fault. It took, yes, David, we could say David raped her, but she also consented to some extent.
Hmm.
So nowhere do we read that where she said no.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think if she would have said no, I think that's something that would have been brought to light. Um,
Potentially, but I think also contextually he's you know,
mhm,
like so I think that's I think that's an area though where it's I think the narrative of that story being a story of rape or sexual assault, I think comes from that dynamic of what position he had and responsibility he had versus what position
mhm.
and power she had. Um, and you see little versions of that story play out in churches too, where it's like, I'm the pastor, I'm the man of God,
Yeah,
like how
yeah.
do you say no in that position? It's a tricky spot.
Yes. And when we look at all of these things going on, how can we? So we see a lot of people leaving the SBC
Yeah.
due to women preachers. We
Hmm.
see a lot of people leaving the Catholic Church due to predators. We see a lot of people leaving Methodist churches due to all this. But the IFB, we can stay at IFB church knowing that all of this stuff is going on around us. How?
Yeah.
How can we say that we are a part of the independent fundamental Baptist movement, knowing we're letting hundreds of predators sit on our pews week after week, month after month, year after
Yeah.
year? They're staying in the pulpits. They're being promoted instead of being punished.
Yeah. Yeah. I I think that's a piece too I want to hit that you are mentioning is that I think a lot of people look at what I do and go, I've had a lot of motives assigned to me over the years, and I started the show as a Christian, and we could talk about
Mhm.
that journey. And legitimately, I can say that was an earnest thing. Um,
Mhm.
so started there. I had people where that wasn't enough, or I wasn't the right type to talk about it, or I wasn't a
Mhm.
pastor, so I can't talk about it, to now being religiously completely unaffiliated, where now that disqualifies me from talking about it. So like no matter what you do, there's something wrong. But one of the motives that's been assigned to me is that I want to just destroy the IFB, or that I'm blaming the whole thing for, like for one group, and there's like a few predators, but you discard the whole movement. And I think, like you mentioned, there's abuse right now in the SBC, Methodist churches. There's public school teachers arrested every single week. And, that's a common one, is like, well, do you want all schools to shut down? Because public school teachers do this too. My issue is not that this happens. If you get enough people in a room, statistically, there's going to be some bad people in that room. My
Mhm.
issue is, what is the general response from the biggest leaders within those denominations? And, again, there are some really great, truly independent, people who don't associate with guys like Trieber, or don't go to these big conferences, or don't send their kids to these Bible colleges. But the ones that do, at this point, there's really no excuse. Like, you're making a very clear line in the sand. And so that's what I want to point out, is like, I'm not sitting here going, "Oh, there was a predator at my church, so the whole thing fell apart for me." It's, there was a predator in the church, and everybody extended more love and grace to the predator than to his victim. Most people didn't
Mhm.
even care who the victim was. And so I just want to make a note of that for anybody who's listening who is in that world still and says, "Oh, you're just discarding it all." It's like, that's the issue to me, is like the response. It's not the responsibility of a pastor to, you know, if there's a predator, like that doesn't fall on them. The response
Right.
to it is when their responsibility comes into play.
Right. And I went to my pulpit a few Sundays ago and I made it very clear that if somebody came to me and made an accusation against you, then it was going straight to the police department and I was wiping my hands of it and you was being suspended from all roles of the church. And I also made it clear that if you are a predator on the pew, then you need to go because you're not welcome here. And we need more preachers to do that. But unfortunately, if they did that, they would lose a lot of their congregation, the way that they're being moved around. One thing that bothers me is how Jack Hiles and how it's still happening today of how people are moving them around.
Yeah.
Um, it happened locally in one of the towns that I'm affiliated with. Is a guy drove a church van, was accused of it. They shipped him off to another state for 2 or 3 years and then brought him back
Yeah.
and suspended him from driving the church van. We can't keep doing that process. You're hurting more people
Right.
because how many people in that church knew exactly what he had done? A lot. That's how it was brought to my attention.
Yeah.
Um, so that disgusts me as well. So I think you made note of something. You said something here.
Mhm.
You started this when you was a Christian. Um, do you still proclaim to be a Christian? Yes or no? If yes, then how have you stayed in? If no, why did you get out? How long have you been out? What was the reasoning for getting out?
Yeah. Yeah, the answer is no. And I cover this a little bit. I wrestled with doing the show, like how much to share of my personal perspective. Because and one of the reasons I've been open about it being a no now is because I was so open when it was a yes. And I felt like I didn't want to just quietly stop talking about it, and then people find out later and be like, you're hiding this, that you're secret. So I was like, there's no agenda. Let me just put out, here's where I am. And it's a weird thing we do a podcast, is eventually people want to know, what do you think? So my journey out was, when I started the show, I was, I was I had left ministry. I was working a secular job, was still, religious, and
Mhm.
started it really with a mindset of like, I don't know what this should look like. I just know that the way the American church is operating right now is not right. Like, there's something really broken here. And then over the next couple years doing the podcast, one, I think it was like two things. I think it was one, just continually studying on my own. It kind of just it stopped clicking into place for me the way that it used to. But then I think also too, I was dealing with, you know, Christians of all stripes who were so upset that I was poking this issue. And I think there was a that amount of pushback and the amount of just like seediness that I was seeing within it was like, okay, this is just disturbing. And I've said this before, I didn't just go like, oh, there's some bad things, and so I left. Because I think there's plenty of apologetics I could explain that would get rid of that objection. I think for me, one of the big claims of Christianity is that it makes people a new creature. And diving into the stories that I was and interacting with the people that I was and just looking at the organizations out there, I didn't see any positive um, transformation that was uniquely uh, attributed to that religious group. Like there are tons of positive transformations that happen in IFB churches every single Sunday. There are people that go into churches, they give up alcoholism, they stop, you know, beating on their kids, they become more present parents, they become better spouses. Like that happens every single Sunday. People's lives are transformed, but they're also transformed in AA meetings, in self-help groups, and like, and for me, I just started going, what is the thing that sets these groups apart from everybody else? Like, what is the thing that is like only the Holy Spirit could make this change in somebody? And I
Hmm.
just didn't have a sufficient answer that I could give where I could go like, yeah, that's exclusively attributed to the Christian faith. And there's a lot more, and whatever I say, people are gonna go like, that's not enough of a reason. Like this is years of me thinking about this, talking about this, studying about this. But that's just some of the big things on the surface that kind of led to that. But ultimately, it was just I used to wake up every day with a default, click like, yeah, that's what it is. Like that's how I see the
Hmm.
world. And then I just started waking up and that wasn't. Like I found myself contorting myself to fit things into this box that was my faith. And that wasn't something I could keep doing. I couldn't keep taking everything that I couldn't make sense of and go like, let me smash that into this and go like, yeah, that's it still fits. It just stopped fitting for me
Right.
at a certain point.
So when you talk about this, would you say that you're an atheist now or agnostic? How would you classify yourself? If you don't mind me asking, if that's
No,
too
I'm
deep,
I'm
we
a
can.
completely no, I'm an open book. I would say, I would say agnostic in terms of like I wouldn't claim to know. I mean most atheists would say the same, like they wouldn't claim to know something that they can't know. I would say right now, like
Okay.
yeah, I would say just I don't know. I would say like I lean toward, I would say, a more of a just naturalistic kind of view of things. But I don't know. I know it's not. I know it's not what I was raised in, but that's one of many options, to check a box off of. Um,
Right.
but yeah.
S- So the way that I process this, and maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, tell me if you've thought about it
Mhm.
this way, is when we have someone come out, and this has happened too, I go back to Judas Iscariot.
Hmm.
He is the definition of Matthew chapter number 7, where Jesus said, and many will come into me in that day and
Hmm.
say, did we not prophesy? Did we not heal? Did we not do all of these things? And he says, depart from me, I never knew you. So when I hear of this happening, that's where I classify them is as a Judas who is a actor of a follower,
Hmm.
but is not a true follower. I would say that I'll just say it, 100% of predators are not Christian at all.
Hmm.
Um, they are they are definitely lost. I may would go as far to say that they're reprobate, but that may be too far. Because it takes a really sick person to screw up a kid's life,
Yeah.
point blank. Um, and I'm very firm about that. I don't think there should be a I don't think there should be a prison sentence for a predator. I don't think that there should be a sex offender list. I think that if you're proven guilty that you're a predator, you should immediately be eliminated off the earth. There's no grace for a predator, in my opinion. And you may feel the same way. I don't know. And that may be a little blunt. And some people may say, well, that ain't nice of a pastor to say, but it ain't nice of a predator to screw up a kid's life, to screw up a woman's life, because they lusted after that person and committed ungodly acts with that person against their will or even in their will. So that's how I categorize these types of people when we're talking about it. It is hard as a pastor to see this take place in the churches and have to stand against it because sometimes you feel like you're being told that you're standing against your own people, but you're not. You're standing against a group of pedophiles. A pedophile is not our people. A person is not born to be a pedophile. A person chooses to be a pedophile. I heard who was it? Jack Hyles that made a statement that if a woman wears a mini skirt, she and a man lusts after her, he deserves to commit the act with her, and she should be in the same prison cell as that man. Absolutely not. That man chose to rape
Yeah.
that woman. Um, and that's how I feel about it. It personally hurts to see that, and I know, and I'm not saying this against you at all, but to see people like you that have such a knowledge of things going on in the church to walk away
Mhm.
and have a more naturalist view because you could do a lot of good, and you do a lot of good for churches.
Yeah.
And but I understand because I'm with you. I do a lot of research. I listen to a lot of sermons. Um, and I won't talk to you about something at the end of the show, but I do a lot of different research, a lot of sermons and things, and it's disgusting at the stuff that I see week after week.
Yeah.
That's not what they call Bible preaching, loud preaching,
Right.
and there's nothing to it. So it would be easy for me as a person outside of religion saying, if that's what religion's about, I don't want nothing of it.
Yeah.
But I grew up under Sammy Allen, Tony Hudson, all of those guys.
Yeah.
And I will be honest now, and I will say this, they hurt the IFB movement just as much as Jack Hyles, Jack Scott, and all of those because we brought up a generation of preachers who always preach standards and never preach the Savior. And that's hurt a lot of people. We have a lot of people that wear dresses to church that is damned in their heart. Um, and men that wear pants all the time that are pretenders of the faith.
Yeah.
Um, and it's disgusting on that part of it too. So I understand how easy it would be, even in my own life, it'd be easy for me to walk away
Yeah.
and say, if this is what religion is about, this is what so-called Christianity is about, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm checking out of it. I don't want nothing to do with it. So I don't fault you at all. And I'll make it clear, I have no hard feelings to anybody that's walked away from Christianity that's seen this side of it.
Right.
Um, the only thing that, and I know you've made it clear, would be to say that I hope that everyone realizes that this is not 100% of people in Christianity. There
Right.
are real
Yeah.
people out here who
Right.
stand for the truth. Um, with love. I think that's one of the things too. I think you would agree with me is I think we're missing love inside of our churches.
Yeah. I'd say so. Yeah. It takes a quick scroll through my inbox. I would agree with your assessment.
So, uh, tell us a little bit more about where your show's going and where you want to end up
Hmm.
with the show. Looking at the goals of the show?
Yeah, I mean, my goal is just to start conversation about these topics, and I think that's, there's no. I was talking to Daryl Dow recently. His episode drops this Sunday, and he started Stuff Fundies Like, and we had a conversation about kind of his time doing that site for 10 years, being one of the first people to really take that conversation to the internet the way that he did. And, I said when I started this show in 2020, there wasn't much to look at as like an example. I said Stuff Fundies Like was kind of, but not really similar to what I'm doing. and I mentioned to him, I said, when you did it, there was even less. And I said it would be really helpful if there was someone who wrote a guide of like how to do a podcast about clergy abuse, or like how to do a blog about fundamentalism. Um, but all that aside, it's difficult to know sometimes where to take things. There's a lot of questions to ask all the time about like what is the purpose of this. And I think one of the things that I said early on, and I mentioned it to Daryl, is like I didn't want the show to be just another Stuff Fundies like. I think Stuff Fundies like had a really great purpose, and I think it had some things that really helped me when I was a teenager, and that was like the resource to find things. But I didn't want to just be another meme page that goes like, fundamentalism is silly because of this. I could have content for days about things that are silly in that world. Um, you know, I'd say when this show started, it was very much just like, here's some interviews with people and here's their experiences, and there it's out there. And I think as the show has progressed, it's, more and more people have said, well, what's your thought? Or we've been listening to snippets of you in these conversations. What's your take on this? And so I'm trying now to always balance the responsibility of like, this show is very much about the stories of survivors who've experienced abuse, whether they are, and I've had the gamut of them, whether they are still believers, not believers, or,
Mhm.
whatever their take is or how it affected them. I just want them to share their perspective because they haven't had a chance to do that. On the other side of it, though, there are things like it's easy to just go, oh, there was this rape case in this church, but then you do need to peel back the layers and go, what are some of the preaching in this church? What are some of the things that people are learning that makes this kind of behavior normalized? How is the predator treated in the church? And so I'd say there's been a real gradual shift into more and more analysis of the whys this happens. And then there has been some opinion pieces that I've dipped my toe into, but I'm trying to just segment it out. So I would say my goal is just that the show doesn't lose its core focus, which is the topics that I talk about, but also continues to evolve and just take the conversation where it needs to go. But that's very much dependent on where the culture's at, what's happening, like what is it that we need to be discussing, whether that's legislation, whether that's, theology, whether that's a leader in the movement. And so my goal is just to keep broadening the conversation and talk about how fundamentalist environments are conducive for abuse. When
Mhm.
you've got a high control religious group, and there's no outside connection for help, it sets people up for very, very bad situations.
Yeah. One of the things I disagree with the fundamentalist movement in, there's a lot, but they make an idol out of their pastor.
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, their past, everybody needs a man of God in their life. Okay. I somewhat agree with that. But if you have an issue, you take it to the pastor first. No, that ain't always the case.
Right.
There are things that have happened in my life that if I took it to a pastor, it'd be broadcast all over the internet. Um, so I totally disagree with that. So my next question for you is who or what ministry surprised you the most of having predators in it?
Um, I actually answered this question the other day to a friend of mine. I was on their show and they said, um, oh, because they mentioned when I had first ever stumbled across an abuse case, and they said they said they thought to themselves, like, okay, well, this is the one weird time that this happened. And the way that my brain interpreted when I found it was, okay, now anything could happen. Like, if
Hmm.
this could happen, like the door's open for anything. And so I don't know if that's cynical. I don't know what that is or how my brain views that stuff. I'm not often surprised by anything. It's a gut punch every time. Like it's still shocking and it's still like, I can't believe
Hmm.
this is happening. But I'm trying to think if there's one specifically where I was like, oh, I can't imagine it happening there. Like I would say at this point, like nothing really surprises me. I'm more surprised. The most surprising thing that's happened to me recently is I had a pastor whose church I covered who called me and said, thank you for how you covered the story. You covered it honestly, and I think you were fair in what you said. And, and obviously I won't share who that was, but that was something where when I saw his name pop up on my phone, I was like, oh, great. and then had the conversation and was pleasantly surprised that that was the take. So, and again, that's a rarity in all the episodes I've done. That's not something that happens very often. So, I'm more surprised when the right thing happens than when the wrong thing happens at this point.
Mm, okay. How do you get all, and I guess this is something if you want to answer, you can. Is there a lot of hate calls that come to you from the IFB?
I mean, I keep my number pretty hidden. But my messages and comments, I definitely get a good batch. I would say in the beginning, I got more. Like when I first started the show, it was a lot. Like I was inundated with a lot of negative messages. I think now, I think some people just got bored with that, or some people just, they've already gotten out what they need to say. So I get them less frequently, but I have certain people that just flood my comments all the time, but I just let them, because sometimes the best argument against someone is to let them speak for themselves. And so um, I've gotten sermons preached against me and comments and emails, and I've got some gnarly stuff there.
Right. How do you process that? Do you just take it with a grain of salt, or does it affect you mentally, physically?
No, it's never really affected me that much. The feedback that affects me is if someone who is a survivor or someone who has been harmed feels like I didn't report correctly on something, or if I worded something wrong, which that's pretty much the only time this has ever really happened is like, I've asked like, hey, what do you think about how I worded that? Because I'll see a comment come in and they'll be like, yeah, I wouldn't have said it that way. And it's like, okay, that bothers me a little bit. Um, but when someone says, "Oh, you're a reprobate and you're headed for hell and you're like maggots," and all this stuff, like it doesn't really do anything for me. It The content side of me goes, "Well, great. I'll snip that and post that because that's what a great endorsement of what I do is. You're going to preach about this or talk about this." So it doesn't affect me that much. It affects me more when I see people actively harming other people. Because
Hmm.
and again, I'm jaded. I've been doing this 5 years, so there's nothing I haven't really heard. It bothers me when I see people who I know aren't in the public eye that much, or who suddenly find themselves under a spotlight that they don't want to be under. That affects me a lot more. Or if it's people I know or from the past or something like that'll stick. But yeah, for the most part though, it doesn't really bother me, like what people say.
Okay. All right. So you take it with a grain of salt, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like, why would I let their opinion affect me if I wouldn't let them, be a mentor or give me advice?
Right.
It's like, okay, so the right people are upset. That's what it
I,
is.
I understand. So I guess one of the things that I will ask, and this is probably something people will wonder, is your podcast like edited? Like, do you edit out certain parts, or is it full blown and you just edit out the silence, or is there no editing at all? How do you do that?
For the most part, no editing. Like, I don't I will occasionally edit like if they say oh and they accidentally say another victim's name or something that's not public, or if there's something that like legally would cause them an issue. Like I know I had someone who was in a legal case and they mentioned something like in it, but it was still in process where it's just like don't mention the case at all, like just leave it where it is. So like little things like that. But for the most part, I leave everything unfiltered. If a guest wants to swear, I let them swear. If they don't want to, if they want to share how their faith has helped them, I let them share that. If someone wants to share why they left, I let them share that. Like the whole point is letting them share their story. And so if I start censoring or picking what fits my brand, like I feel like it kind of defeats the purpose.
Hmm.
Um, and then,
Right.
sometimes I'll add clips or something for context. But for the most part, I like to keep it just here's the conversation. That's what it is. So,
Okay. We're getting close to wrapping up. What is your favorite part of doing the podcast?
I think my favorite thing about the podcast in general is that like I think sometimes when people leave fundamentalism or any high control group, I think it they still are controlled by it in the sense that they wake up thinking about it. They try to live in ways that like, I'm going to have a beer at a restaurant because I know they wouldn't want me to have a beer. Or I'm going to listen to this music because I know they wouldn't want me to listen to it. And, I think that's a normal phase. It's the same way kids go through rebellious phases like I'm going to do this.
Hmm.
But I've tried to build a life that very much is just based on what I would like to do and what I value, and not just doing stuff to kind of stick the finger at the past. And so I
Mm-hmm.
do enjoy that the podcast allows me to have a set designated time and process to work through things that have affected me and have affected people close to me,
Mm-hmm.
and then shut the laptop, close it up, and then have my life that's outside of it. And I'm very
I got
happy
you.
that like people know the public version of me, but don't know like they don't know my family life, and they don't know that, and they don't need to. Like I have my private world that I built that I'm very happy with. And then I've got the show. And so I like being able to have that exist on its own.
Okay. What is your least favorite part of doing the show?
Just the weight of it. I mentioned that previously on podcast too. It's just a stacking weight. Like every story, even though you're not surprised, it just feels like it adds to that load of like weight. And it's almost, I've talked to a couple friends where it's like it's kind of like secondhand smoke. Like you're not the one smoking, it's not happening to you, but if you're around it all the time and you're breathing it in, or you have to listen to these sermons, or you have to talk to a victim who's going through horrific stuff, like it's very heavy. So I would say just the mental toll of that. Like that's the thing that affects my mental health the most, is just the weight of the stories, and this parts of the stories that never go to air, where like it's told to me off mic, or it's something I just
Mhm.
know that we don't share because it's maybe too graphic, or something that they don't want shared. Like those things are really heavy because I feel like not only does nobody not only have I heard it, but it's also saying like it's not out there. Like I just know this thing, and I'm seeing people react to the story as if like, oh, it wasn't as big a deal as it. And I'm like, if you knew the full story, like there's some really heavy stuff happening
Mhm.
here. So that's probably the worst part.
Mhm. So, is there anything that you wanted to cover that I missed, or any point you want to drive home and to wrap up here?
Probably should have thought of one. I should have my 3 points and a good takeaway for people. uh, And I mean, I think honestly, my biggest thing I would drive for people, because I would assume most of your listeners are still in church or still like navigating some of that world, or at least are familiar with like similar backgrounds. I would just say like my personal beliefs, I think, are irrelevant to the majority of my show. And I would say the same for my guests. I would say like don't discount a person's experience based on their faith journey. I certainly
Hmm.
have episodes that I'm very clear out of the gate, like, hey, this episode's kind of my opinions on this thing, so take it with a grain of salt. Like, here's what it is. But like, it's amazing the people that will discard a survivor story because that person is no longer religious, or they will discredit my entire show because I'm no longer religious. Like, on a very sincere level, like I know that there are people who will always go to independent Baptist churches or go to Southern Baptist or whatever church they go
Hmm.
to. And as much as like I might have my personal opinion about whether that's a great use of time, like I I still deep down want the people who do choose to go to the safest possible version of that. And so like I'm more than happy to sit down with the pastor and say, here's how you can make your church safer. And I think like for the people who say like, oh, I'm just attacking the church, like if I was, I wouldn't waste my time having those conversations. Like I wouldn't waste my time giving resource advice to pastors and things like that. So I just would encourage people like look past like maybe the theological differences or political differences or whatever that looks like, or my length of my hair, or whatever that is, and look at like, is there validity to what I'm saying? And is this something that we can all like, regardless of our affiliations and party lines and whatever that looks like, can all kind of band together and say like, how do we address this? And maybe we don't agree on everything, but like there's probably some way we can help each other in dealing with something that we all know is a really bad thing. So that's kind of what I would say. And I'd say it in a more flowery way if I'd prepared something, but that's what it is for now.
All right. Well, thank you so very much, Eric, for coming on the podcast today. And I appreciate your input and everything that you've said. And I appreciate the work that you do each and every week on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Guys, if you are here listening and you want to listen to the Preacher Boys podcast, there will be a link in the description below so that you can take a listen to the podcast. Thank you so very much for listening to this segment of Jump In with Jonathan. I am your host, Jonathan Smith. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you. Have a great day.
Perfect.
Thank you for listening to today's episode on Jump In with Jonathan. And keep in mind that life is better when you jump in. Have a blessed day.